Thank you, John. So, as John mentioned, I am a middle school science teacher. I've been practicing in the classroom for 20 years here in the Raleigh-Durham area of North Carolina. And excuse me, I was lucky enough about 5 years ago to write the book Creating a Culture of Feedback, which is a nice short little introduction to my mindset around feedback. I really think that anybody who uses Mote is a fan of feedback because that's really what it's all about. In addition to all the great ideas that Maureen and other folks have been sharing today. And so my goal today is to share with you some of the tried and true practices that I've learned from making the feedback that we provide, whether it be through Mote or any format, how to make that feedback really hit home and really get kids to act on it, which is obviously the goal of feedback in the end. So just again to reintroduce myself here, I am an author and a practicing classroom teacher. That's the thing I'm most proud about because I feel like when it comes to listening to folks share what they've learned how to do, um, being someone who works in the classroom is where all the credibility lies, right? And I actually teach at a year-round school, so I am in my second month of school right now. Was teaching earlier today, as a matter of fact, and my students were excited to hear that I'm going to be presenting today. So they were maybe going to tune in themselves to see how things go. I teach eighth graders, 13, 14-year-olds, and it's sort of a sweet spot for me because I think of myself as a middle schooler on the inside. They share a lot of commonality with me when it comes to everything, I think. If you'd like a copy of my slides later on or to follow along today, or just a two-page summary of the ideas that I'll be sharing with you, you can use either of these links. Feel free to open them up now or later. You can always access any of this video later on. So here is the question I'd like to open with, and I'd love to see responses in the chat from any of you in the comments who would like to answer. Many teachers, they use grades because grades can be a powerful motivator to get students to work harder or to complete assignments that they would not otherwise complete. But I'm curious from you, if you could drop a number from 1 to 5 there in the comments. How do you feel about grades in your classroom if you're a classroom teacher, or how do you feel about grades when it comes to your own experience as a student? Do you feel like your class would be better without grades, or do you feel like you need grades? Are they something that are an essential part of the way you do business in your classroom? I completely relate to the idea that grades are a necessary and required part of many of our uh, lives, right, and our professional lives in particular. Um, I am fortunate enough to work in a building where my administrator has given me the flexibility to to try some innovative things and to try to move away from grades whenever possible. But it sounds like a lot of you align with a lot of the other educators that I've spoken with about this and believe that grades are not necessary in the absence of a higher power telling us they have to be there, and that sometimes they actually get in the way of learning. The truth is that grades have become a really negative factor because of all the baggage they've picked up over the years. We try to use grades to uh, motivate kids to get work done. We try to use them to divide the kids who belong in the next grade or the next program or on the sports team from those that don't. And because of all that high stakes that gets wrapped into grades, kids feel this motivation to try and get the highest possible grade they can at any cost, which leads to a lot of cheating, especially in secondary classrooms. And so it's been my experience that grades actually create more problems than they solve. And the more that we can use feedback instead of grades as a way to help our students improve their learning, the more we can kind of pull them away from the brink of that high stakes environment and make learning back into something that they really want to do. And so, with that, here are the ways that I see feedback as the motivator. For me, this began many years ago, but during the pandemic lockdown, like many of you, I was faced with a situation where grades just weren't a major factor. We were giving lots of grace. We were grading in a way that lowered the bar, the rigor in many ways, because we understood that students were going through a lot, and that there was a lot of inequity in the opportunities and the tools that they had access to. I worked through a virtual environment in the 2021 school year, and I was working both virtual and in person over the last school year as well. And I asked my students, what kept them working through those virtual times when a lot of students checked out or did less work. Because if grades weren't the motivator, there had to be something that was encouraging my students to participate in what we were doing. And it turns out that the feedback I got from them was that the feedback that I gave to them was one of the things that really pulled them into what we were doing. They told me that the feedback I gave them was personal and meaningful to them, and it motivated them to want to come back and learn some more. And so that's when I knew that the things I was doing before the pandemic lockdown were definitely having a big enough impact that they needed to continue. And here are just some examples of the feedback that I received from students. And you can read them. I won't read them to you, but sometimes it was positive feedback that students were telling me that they wanted me to look more closely at their work. And sometimes they were telling me that they didn't understand the feedback I was giving them, and that they wanted more. And that's a really special thing when a student asks you to give them more feedback on their work. I've yet to meet a student who asks me to give them more grades on their work, but it's really exciting to me when a student will ask for more feedback. It means that that feedback really is meaningful, and they see some benefit in it. So as I mentioned earlier, grades have always been this part of this problem that we have in education. Not only are they not fair and not equal because of the environments the students are working in, but they treat different students differently based on the experiences they've had before they even come into your classroom. And as a result of all of this, it's clear that we need to move away from using grades to motivate students. Grades will likely be a part of our educational landscape for a long time when it comes to creating summative assessments of their work. But when it comes to motivating students to learn, grades are not a great way to do that. And we need something that's more engaging. And so here's what I hope you get out of the next few minutes of listening and sharing your ideas with me. I hope that you'll have a better understanding of the ways that we classroom educators can give students feedback that encourages them to participate in the learning and to grow and improve. If we walk away with that, I'll be a happy camper for sure. So let's start with a little reflection. I have here an example of feedback that has a lot wrong with it. It's feedback that unfortunately is 100% real. It was actually given by a teacher to an individual student. And the feedback says the whole class needs to review the difference between cloud types. The correct answer to number 4 is B. And what I'd love to hear from you in the comments is, what do you see that's wrong with this feedback? What did this teacher do that did not help the student to be motivated, encouraged, or take action to improve their learning? And I'll give you a few seconds to put your ideas in the comments. I love the moat related puns. I'm glad they never really end. And I appreciate all of you and your interaction in the comments. It really does mean a lot to me, hearing what you've said. And going with what some of you have said and what I've heard from many educators before, there's a lot of problems here in this example of feedback. For starters, as several of you mentioned, it's not individualized, right? It speaks to the whole class, and not only is that not fair to that student with their individual strengths and weaknesses, it's not motivating to a student to be given one size fits all comments that don't apply to their own work. It's also, as you guys have mentioned, not specific about the skill or the knowledge, the content that the student really doesn't understand. Cloud types, for those of you who teach science like I do, is a pretty big topic. And it would be nice for the students to receive feedback that actually shows them what they need to improve. And I love the comments about it. It's tone. I feel like that tone is not encouraging. It's not um, recognizing what the students already know. So you guys have nailed exactly what I find about this comment to not be very helpful. And one comment in particular, from Donna, that I find really powerful is the idea that it's not challenging the students to take any further steps, right? We're saying this is wrong, and then we're moving on instead of challenging that student to make changes that will allow them to learn even better. So thank you all for seeing in this comment what I did. And so here are the three tips that we're going to spend a little bit of time diving into over the next few minutes. These encompass what I see as three simple things that we can all do to make our feedback more effective, more meaningful. And like I said before, these can be done through text, through verbal, in-person interactions. But as you'll see, they work the best when you use them through a tool like Mote. So, first of all, really meaningful feedback must occur frequently so that students get into the habit of listening to it or reading it and acting on it. And it needs to be bite sized. Meaningful feedback has to encourage students to do something with that feedback. Feedback is not a passive process, right? It's all about moving forward, taking that next step. And finally, we have to encourage and find ways to help our students take that next step and act on that feedback. So let's dive into those ideas in a little bit more detail. I'm going to start with the idea of bite-sized feedback. When we say bite-sized, what we mean is be as specific as you can. Focus on just one element of the work that you want students to work on. By the way, this also makes it a lot easier to give feedback because you're not focusing on the entire piece of work that a student has submitted. You're focusing on one element and giving feedback to every student about that one element. This helps the feedback to be less work for the teacher, but also it makes the work of applying that feedback appear much more manageable to the students. We've all met a student who just felt like they did everything wrong, and as a result, they weren't very motivated to keep trying. And we need to preserve our students' motivation. We need to keep them encouraged to learn. And one way to do that is to focus on small bits of improvement at a time. Wrapped around that feedback should always be encouragement. Every student does something really, really well, and we need to start by planting that seed of encouragement so that it grows into the tree of improvement. I should coin that phrase. And finally, along the idea of bite sized feedback, we need to create a conversation around feedback. Feedback should not be a one-way street, and it shouldn't be a one and done type of affair. When you give feedback to a student, it's a great idea to end your feedback with a question that encourages your students to respond back, because when they're responding to you, they're thinking about their work. They see their work as not a finished product, but as something that's in process. And the more they focus on that improvement and not giving up, the more your feedback will actually lead to them improving their learning. So let's look at some examples of feedback that follows this idea. The example on the left in the green is a text comment that was made onto a Google Doc assignment. And it says, Jenny, thanks for the time and effort that went into this assignment. Look over the highlighted section to make sure you have correctly matched the elements to their groups. So a couple things to see here. It starts off with a thank you, an acknowledgement of the work that went into this assignment. Students always have the option to not do the work. But when they feel like we appreciate the effort they put in, they're going to be more motivated and invested in continuing that learning. And then the feedback focuses on one section and one idea. So the student's not overwhelmed by what they may have done incorrectly, but they're allowed to focus in on the thing that needs the most improvement. In the comment on the right, we see this was actually an audio comment, a mote, that was given to a student on their Google Slides work. And it says, great start, Kyler. I love the creativity in your weather map. Take a closer look at the fronts on your map and see if you can make some improvements. Again, we're acknowledging the positive work that's there. And then we're giving them very specific ideas about what can improve. This feels manageable to students. They feel like, you know what, I can do that. I can do that one thing that Mr. Cancellieri has invited me to do. So that's the idea of bite-sized feedback. Let's move from there on to the idea of making feedback sticky. And when I say sticky, I mean that it's something that students can't let go of. They can't just move on past. Like when you accidentally find that piece of gum underneath one of the tables or chairs in your classroom, this is the kind of feedback that stays with you, sometimes for the whole day. You find it in places you didn't expect. So, one way that you can do this is by making your feedback into an investigation for your students. Invite them to look back at their work and look more closely at the things that they did, the good things and the things that could be better. And you need to make your feedback specific to that one student's strengths and opportunities. As many speakers have mentioned, Mote and other tools are great at offering comment banks that you can reuse, but the combination of feedback that a student gets over the long haul should definitely be personalized to them so that they feel like it's a conversation between them and their teacher. They're going to take that kind of feedback a lot more personally, and they're going to be invested in making it better. And then, as I mentioned earlier, turn it into a comment. Ask them questions. Challenge them to think. One of my favorite quotes comes from the education author William, and he says that feedback should be more work for the student than it was for the teacher. It should it should cause the student to have to go back and do a little bit of thinking about their work. I love that idea. So let's look at some examples of what sticky feedback might look like. So here's a text comment next to some annotations in a text document. And it says, "Great work, Megan. You've listed and described these processes perfectly. Two of them are in the wrong order. Can you find them and resubmit?" So again, we've acknowledged the good work the student did. We've called out their name, which is super powerful, right? They know that comment was written just for them or spoken just for them. And by focusing in on just two things that are wrong, the student feels like this is bite sized feedback. But in addition to that, I haven't told them which two things are wrong. So now the student has a little bit of a mystery on their hands. Now they're going to go back and reread that, looking for the two things that need to be switched around. It's become a little bit of a game for them, and that's going to encourage that student to make that change, and then it finishes with a resubmission. And I find that when I ask a question like, "Can you find it and resubmit?" my students will find an excuse to respond like, "Yes, I did. And thank you for that chance." They're going to want to respond to a question. They don't like to leave them hanging. In the example on the right, students were asked to annotate a photograph of some rock layers. And the comment says, "Ravisha, you have done a great job identifying the unconformity. Can you use the rest of the image to figure out what may have caused it?" So this is a student that achieved the level of comprehension and mastery that we were looking for. But rather than just saying good job and moving on, we add an extra challenge. We differentiate for those students who can go an extra step or two beyond what we were expecting. Rather than letting them rest on the laurels of achieving mastery, we push them to dig a little bit deeper and do a little bit more. And we do it in a personalized way so that they know it's their teacher saying, "I know you can handle a little bit more of a challenge. Why don't you dig in a little bit deeper?" All right, our third tip is to make the feedback actionable. So this is super important because it reinforces that idea that the feedback is not the end, it's not a summative assessment, it's formative feedback that helps students to continue to improve their work. Now, in an area like English language arts, where students are constantly revising, this idea is a little bit more native to the students. But I find that a lot of my science students don't think of feedback that way. They're used to getting a grade and then moving on, either showing it off or being ashamed of it and not going back to make any changes that might improve things. So, one of the most critical steps here is that we have to create that opportunity for students to use the feedback to make changes. We have to give them that second chance, sometimes that third chance. We have to give them both the time and the opportunity to change their work and to see the benefits that come from that grit, that stick with itness that keeps them working on their improvement. And when they submit it again and they've made improvements, we need to reward that improvement. Okay, we need to praise them and we need to give them the higher mark that they've earned. If they show us that on the second or third try they have improved their mastery, they deserve a higher score for that mastery. So let's take a moment here to reflect on the three ideas that I've just brought up. We're talking about bite sized feedback, sticky feedback, and actionable feedback. Based on what you've heard me talk about and what you've seen others post in the comments, I'd love to hear which one of these ideas or strategies is the one that's got your brain buzzing right now. What's the one that's got you excited maybe to try it out? Please go ahead and put your ideas, your ahas into the comments. Donna, I love you pointing out that the idea of going back and improving is not just some ivory tower idea, but it actually relates to the business world that students are going to be living in. You know, I like to tell my students I had to take my driver's test 3 times before I could pass it, but I got the same driver's license as everybody else because eventually I showed that I'd mastered that skill. Yeah, thank you, Antonio. I for recognizing that actionable is one of those most critical steps, right? And I love that Moat gives us a way to create a conversation back and forth through audio that can lead to that reinforcement, and students can keep the same assignment with improvements and with the Moat comments there. Yeah, Donna, thank you. The sticky part is actually the part I get the most excited about. When I can leave a comment for a student that is a little bit of a tease that just grabs them and pulls them in, then I feel like I've done my job well. Well, I'm going to take my last couple minutes here to just share with you guys one more idea, which is this can feel like a lot of work, right? Adding all this extra detail to your comments, to your feedback can feel like a lot to fit in. And so, if you're like most teachers I've worked with, when I ask them this question, how feasible is this? A lot of people are in the 1 to 2, maybe the 3 range on this scale. They feel like I'd love to live in a world where this is possible, but I just don't know where I'll find the time to do this. And I get that. I mean, like I said, I've been a practicing classroom teacher for 20 years. I get the amount of work that goes into this. But that's why I want to share with you a couple of last minute ideas here on how to make it more feasible for you. So, web-based tools, which have become the standard for a lot of us, provide a lot of really high efficiency ways to do this. I mentioned earlier comment banks. You can create comment banks and then create a mixture of comments from the bank that is unique to the child. But it doesn't mean that every word you write to that child is only written to that child or spoken to that child. I like to create short videos that explain um, common mistakes to students, and then I drop a link to that video or that moat, that audio moat, into my comment so that I'm not creating it on the fly. I made it in advance or as soon as I saw that a mistake was common. And that video or audio can create a really meaningful way for kids to learn. Obviously, using digital documents creates this nice little breadcrumb trail of the changes that they've made. You can literally watch the progress they're making, and that's really powerful as well. And of course, Moat makes this audio version of feedback such a powerful thing. With 2 clicks of your mouse, you've left an individual personalized comment for a student. I can leave my 120 students each a comment in less than an hour when I'm really working hard on giving them feedback. And that's something I can't say about any other tool. Moat gives me the flexibility to do the things I've shared with you and still have some time for my personal life, right? So, with that in mind, I just want to remind you who I am, give you an email address and a Twitter handle that you can use if you want to reach out to me. I am always happy to share more ideas like this with you and with anyone else. And remember that you can access these slides in a little 2-page summary there at the link on the bottom. And I really want to thank you guys for the time you've given me and your patience with my croaky voice. And I appreciate the interaction and the comments that you guys have given. So thank you very much.